Paula, as soon as you open the Gospels, there is Jesus the healer. Take Mark's Gospel. I mean, it's that wonderful, rapid-moving, fast action opening to the Gospel where events tumble over each other. But coming out of those early episodes of Mark's Gospel, you can't get far even into chapter 2 without realising that healing is a central part of what Jesus does and who he is. So what's that about?
Well, in a way, it takes you all the way back to the beginning of Genesis, that the God who creates is the God who recreates. And over again throughout the Old Testament, you have this picture of a God who creates and recreates the world. The God you get in the Old Testament is not a God who creates and then walks off and leaves it to itself. He constantly stands by, recreating the world that he created in the first place. So, of course, therefore, when Jesus comes in the Gospels, it is inevitable that Jesus will be the one who comes and acts as God has done all the way through, recreating the world in which that God has loved and created since the dawn of time.
So you've referred us back to the Genesis narrative. So there's a connection there, presumably, with, as it were, the second part of the creation narrative, which is the fall,
Yes.
where we get this breaking, this fracturing, this dislocation of that creation. So is that part of this story, as it were, which lies behind our understanding of healing?
Oh, absolutely. If you were to kind of encapsulate what the Old Testament is about, part of what the Old Testament is about is the telling of this story of fracture, and then of God's attempts again and again and again to heal the fracture, to begin to stand at the heart of the relationship with his people, and to find a way in which his people can respond back to God. The story of the Old Testament is the story of the covenant and the way in which God yearns to bring the people back into relationship with himself. And of course, as well, is the story of the way in which that yearning just simply is never fulfilled, that the people never are able to can recreate that relationship in order to kind of heal the fracture. Until you get into the New Testament text, where we find Jesus, who comes and stands in the middle and ultimately heals that fracture and gives us the way back to the healing of the relationship that was talked about all the way back from Genesis 2 onwards.
So this healing motif then that we're developing, and Jesus as that focal point of healing. Clearly the obvious element of that is the physical healing that we see in so many of those miracle stories in the New Testament, but that's not the whole picture, is it, by any means?
Not at all. I mean, and one of the really important things to bear in mind is that it's very easy to our 21st century mind to become fixated with the actual miraculous healing element. And of course that's really important, but it's not the whole picture. Because when you have a look beneath the text in the New Testament, one of the really key things is the recognition that the people who are healed are people who are in dire need of being brought back into the heart of society. So healing's a lot more than just about the body. It's about relationship, it's about how you engage with society, it's about how you engage with God. So healing is a much, much bigger idea than just bodily miraculous healing.
Give us some examples of that.
Well, maybe one of the best examples you can find in Luke 8, which is that lovely and well-loved story, both of the healing of the woman who is bleeding and of Jairus' daughter. And what you get there are this kind of wonderful image painted next to each other. First of the woman who has bled for 12 years, and then the story of this girl who is 12, and the resonance between those two is very striking, that this girl who is 12 has died. And it is worth bearing in mind that New Testament scholars do kind of draw a spectrum from illness to death. There is a New Testament scholar who rather wryly points out that death is the extreme form of illness. So you have that kind of notion that death is actually on the same spectrum. It's not that different from being ill.
Yeah.
And so actually both are healing narratives. And what's going on in those healing narratives is that both the woman who is bleeding and the girl who has died become impure. And when you become impure, you're cast out of society. And so we have this slightly, well, really quite incredibly moving story of the woman who has been ill for 12 years, who is lonely because she is ill, but even more so, and excruciatingly so, she is lonely because she is cast out of society. She has become impure by the way in which she is ill. So as a result, she isn't meant to be in crowds of people. She isn't meant to touch anybody. She is cast out of all of the structures of society. And so healing therefore becomes not just the physical wellness, but it becomes an invitation back into relationship, which is a really important thing.
So in all sorts of ways, that story of that woman, her being in the crowd, her touching Jesus, and then her ultimate healing of her physical malady, is about a kind of complete putting back together of a life that has become exploded apart, as it were. Her life is in pieces, almost literally.
Yes, that's right. And what Jesus does is he not only makes her body well, but he makes her soul well as well. He says, welcome back into the heart of the society. Now she can be back in relationship, not only with her neighbours, but actually also with God. She's now allowed back into the temple, which is a really important feature of the whole healing narrative.
As people in this course look at some of these ideas about healing, perhaps it's important that they think about some of the words that we have, that we use healing words to translate. I mean, take that story you've just been referring to in Luke 8. There's that phrase right at the end of that story where Jesus says to that woman, your faith has made you, well, in some translations, well, in some translations, your faith has healed you. What's that word all about?
Well, it's a fascinating word, and it's one of those words that is actually really hard to translate properly from Greek into English, because the word is simply the word for salvation. Literally, what Jesus says is, your faith has saved you. And that indicates to us that something much bigger is going on than just the physical healing. What Jesus is saying is salvation has come. It's come to you in the miraculous healing of your body, but probably even more importantly to the woman who has been outcast for all these years, it has come to her in that she is now able to be in true relationship with her neighbour and now true relationship with God as well. Truly salvation has come to her because of her faith.
And as we begin this study series, there are other words, aren't there, in the New Testament which are also to do with healing, which perhaps it's worth people just having some information about that we put sort of on the table at this stage.
Absolutely. So there's three words really which are key for understanding the notion of healing in the New Testament. There's sozo, the word we've just talked about, which is the word connected to salvation, and it is interesting to notice the number of times that comes up in the New Testament. Then you have the big, more generic word, which is iaamai. And iaamai is simply kind of all-encompassing word, which describes the process of moving from illness to wellness. It's not very specific, it's not very focused, but it is that kind of movement from illness to wellness. And then the third word, which is a word which will be familiar to lots of people because it's come into all sorts of English words, is therapeuo, from which of course we get the English word therapy as well as all sorts of other words. And the therapeuo word is a word which is particularly interested in the process. So it's not like iaamai, which is about the big generic idea, but therapeuo is the process by which you become well. So the care, the concern which people show you, which allows you to move from the illness to the wellness.
And I think it's that therapeuo root which is there at the very end of the New Testament, where we read about the healing of the nations. Now, I don't know what the connection might be there, but at the very least it says something about this healing being not just for individuals, but this healing is something which is corporate as well.
Indeed, and that Revelation passage is really crucial at that particular point, because it reminds us that healing isn't just about a physical ailment, it's about something much bigger than that. But also, very, very importantly, it's not just about individuals. As we all know, it is communities, nations that are as in much dire need of healing as it is individuals. And it's worth reminding ourselves as well that Revelation image takes us all the way back rather pleasingly to the start again, because the tree which is for the healing of the nations must surely be the tree of life, which is referred to in Genesis 2. And Genesis 2 has that image of the tree of life from which we are cut off as a result of the fall. So Revelation now has that wonderful image that come the end times, come the consummation of everything, true healing becomes possible, because altogether we can eat from the leaves and the fruit of the tree of life and be truly back in relationship with God again.
So healing actually becomes one of those threads which takes us right through the scriptural narrative from Genesis to Revelation.
Indeed, so it becomes the umbrella that you can follow from the start all the way through to the end.
Thank you.